Hey everyone, this is Tabitha for Some Mud Girl, and I'm here today to go over how you can do a digital scene and clear stamp merge. Um, the card that I'm showing there is with the beautiful stamp Flutter by Fairy Clear Stamp, and it is merged with the Mushroom Garden digital background. And the technique that I used is actually using the cut file of Flutter by Fairy and the digital background in an editing software. And in this case, I used Silhouette Studio Designer Edition. You can use Photoshop or GIMP Works too. The cut files are just easily traced in Silhouette Studio because they're made to be cut out with an electronic cutter. So I go ahead and use that for it. The items that you will need to complete this look is Flutter by Fairy Clear Stamp, the cut file Flutter by Fairy, Mushroom Garden digital background, editing software such as my Silhouette Studio Designer Edition, an inkjet or laser printer, makes no difference. And then I went with a nearly no lines look, and I used a Memento ink Toffee Crunch for that nearly no lines look, as well as I printed out the image with a very pale kind of brownish that looks very similar to Toffee Crunch. And then of course your acrylic block and stamp cleaners and all that kind of stuff. And then papers, coloring, that all kind of stuff. But what I will go over here is just how you can merge the images. But I did go ahead and I colored the image, and you can see the finished card on your screen now, and then at the end I'll be back with it. This video is actually broken up into two parts. The first part is it's a screen capture that I did showing you going through each of the steps on how I pull in the images. In fact, I even take you into Photoshop to color my image using Christie's technique, using the blend overlay of screen. So you get a little refresher on that, and then I take that image directly into my Silhouette Designer, use the cut file to use a subtraction, and then so the second part will pick up with it actually printed out, and I enlarged some of the lines, thickened some of the lines so you can see it a little bit better, and then you actually see me stamping it. And then at the end of that video you see the finished product and why I choose the no lines technique. So sit back, relax. Again, this is Tabitha, and I am the captain for this journey for today. So now we're going to begin with part one of this. I am going to use the Flutter by Fairy cut file. I am using the Mushroom Garden digital scene, and I'm going to be using my Silhouette Studio Designer Edition. I know you can do this in SCAL, so shortcuts a lot, and eCal, depending upon which thing. Essentially, the tools that we want in your electronic cutter software are subtract, as well as the ability to scale, so you can actually change the size of the image. What I also decided for this is that I'm going to first take my digital scene image, the Mushroom Garden, into my Adobe Photoshop to color it, because I want to do the nearly no lines technique. I'm sure you've heard of the no lines technique, but I don't never get my lines light enough. I can't commit fully to that, so I do the nearly no lines technique. You can do this in many programs, and I'm going to use the technique that Christy put on her blog last month. Love this technique, first time I ever heard of it, and it's brilliant for this. So I'm going to take my copied image, I'm going to just drag it into my Adobe Photoshop. I'm going to double click on the image layer, so it's layer 0. Create a new layer which I drag under it, and now I'm going to fill it with a light brown color. In this case I am using F1E0CB. I've also used light pale cool brown. It's a little bit darker though, but we'll go with this. So I filled that image. I click on that the image background, the first layer, and then I change how it's blended, the blending mode to screen. And there we go.
Now from here, instead of saving the image or saving a secondary image, what I do is I go to Select All, I go to Edit, Copy Merged, and over into my Silhouette Studio Designer, I right-click and paste. And there the image is, and I don't have to worry about saving a secondary image anywhere. This also means that if I do it multiple times in different kind of days or something, then I'm going to have to redo that every time. But I don't do it that often, so this works. I'm immediately going to size this down, and I'm over in Europe, so we actually use metric system, and I'm going to change this to a width of 10 centimeters. And then we are going to zoom in to this for the rest of it. The next part, you can go ahead and close down Photoshop, select No for saving, and now I'm going to bring in my Flutter by Fairy cut file. All I have to do is drag it over into my Silhouette Studio Designer Edition. That's one of the things why the Designer Edition is just preferred. I'm going to click on it, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this into a wider screen. We have to prep it. Like all the cut files that we have at Some Odd Girl, we need to prep the cut file. Easily done just by tracing it. And so what you can do is you go to open the trace window, select trace area, select all the way around it, turn off high pass filter. I usually put my scale down to 4 because it gets a finer scale around the edges, and then I move my threshold up to about 70 to 100, and essentially you just want everything to be filled in. And then in this case, what I want to do is trace and detach. And what that does is that it traces each of these things. There's usually a little bit of bordering left over, but with the cut files, it doesn't make a difference. So I'm going to delete that extra stuff. And now that I have the fairy and the 2 butterflies separated, what you can do is, if you go over to the cut settings, and if you do cut edge, it cuts the edge of it. So the trace and detach just allows you to have them separately, which is really nice. And we are going to keep them as a silhouette right now. And just so we can see that all of them have a cut edge kind of a thing going on. Or you can do cut, and it does the same exact thing. So I'm going to select them. Don't need to cut them out. So now that they are available to individually place, we are going to create our scene. Now when you pull over the cut file, or when you open up the cut file from Some Odd Girl, there are 2 things that you should know. That it's already sized. So it is already sized to your thing. It also has a bit of a border around it, so it is larger than the stamp is going to be. And that works really well for us. That's also another reason why I decided to opt for the scene to be nearly no lines, because then I can drag in that color into that area that is bordering around the stamp, and it fills it in so it doesn't look like I have a white border around my stamp, but that it is a truly merged image. There is another way that we can do this, and that is by selecting the fairy. We can actually do it on this little butterfly. We'll zoom into it a little bit. And then what we need to do is open the offset window. And we use offsets a lot. But what I want to do here is, instead of creating an offset, I want to make an internal offset. That means that it goes in just a tiny bit. Now if I know the lip is about 1/4 of an inch. So if I set that internal offset to be less than 1 centimeter, then it will go in a tiny bit, but it will still leave a nice offset on the original cutting file. It just makes it a little bit in more so we can get more of the color, more of the scene in there without having to do too much work. So I'm going to delete that. I'm going to use this butterfly. And then I'm going to do the same here. So we have the fairy picked. I go up to the offset window, internal offset, and I go down to 0.090 centimeters. Click apply, and then I can delete the silhouette. And this is the part that we will use. And then one more time, internal offset, 0.9, and delete. So now I have my 3 cut file, the fairy and the 2 butterflies. And now what we are going to do is the actual subtraction part of it. So you place the fairy wherever you want within the image. I kind of want her floating on the ground, but kind of to the side. So I want as much of the mushroom as I can, but I know that she's going to be in front of it. And also keep in mind that we have, what I want is a square of 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters. And so we have a little bit of room. And what I always do is I go ahead and make a square the size that I want it. Then I know how much room I need to change, you know, how much room I have to play with on the placement for the fairy as well as the scene. And to do this, I just created a square. I am going into the scale menu, and I'm going to put 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters. And then I always, just in case, I just send that to back. In fact, we'll go ahead and fill that in white so you can see it. So there we see the height of where things are going to be, as well as the placement of the, roughly the placement of the scene. Now I want the scene a little more lowered on that 10 centimeters, as well as a little more centered. So I'll move that first, and then we will move the fairy to where I want it. So about there, a little bit down. Okay, so now I always do this. I have the scene picked. I duplicate that. I move that scene off to the side. It's just a, you know, just a measure that I take. I also go ahead and duplicate the fairy, because instead of having to go back and back, or I'm not sure, I can print out both of these after we do the subtraction. Then I can pick which one I want later. So I click the scene as well as the fairy. They're both clicked it. Clicked it. Great word. They're both clicked. Then I go up to the open the modify window. And what we want is subtract. And according to the silhouette help thing, it says use the frontmost shape to cut a hole in the backmost shape. The backmost shape can be either a single shape or a group. Right now we have a single image. The backmost shape is the scene, while the foremost is the fairy. So by clicking subtract, it'll create a hole where the fairy is. So now we have this wonderful hole where we'll be able to stamp the fairy. I have a little problem with kind of being able to stamp so clearly. So what I want to do, so you can see it, is you can match up your cut file. There we go. There we go. The cut file there is now matched up. Now, if you want to, you can change the line color and also print this out. Put like a light, you know, the same kind of really light brown, a little bit darker here. And then that means that when you go to place your stamp on it, you'll be able to see it. Now I'm going to print out 2 of these, and I'm going to darken up that line. And in the Silhouette Designer edition, it does not print out your lines automatically. So what you need to do is, I first color it the one I want. I go to the line style, which is there. I click line thickness, so about 0.5 thickness, and print lines of selected shapes. And if I were on my second one of this, I won't do it as thick, but this is just to show you what you can do. And then what I do is I select both of these again, and I right click and I group. And then if I plan to use my silhouette to cut this out, which for the most part I do all the time, then I just group the containing box plus the fairies and group them and then print it out. In a lot of cases, if it's just a square image like this, all I do is I print out the line and then I use a ruler to cut it out, as it were. So that's what we'll be doing today to save some time. If you want the butterfly is also in the scene, then all we have to do is kind of go through the same thing. So I have the butterfly there, and now that the backmost image is actually grouped, we can see how it does with the group. I click the butterfly as well as the group. I go back up to the modify, open the modify window, and I go to subtract. And now there's a hole where the butterfly was. But before that, I had already done a duplicate. So now I'll be able to go in with this duplicate and place it. If I can actually. Okay, let's see. I got the butterfly now. And move the butterfly. Where it was. It's really hard to place it right where it was. Okay, so there it was. Now I'm going to change the butterfly's color. And make sure that it is printed out. And I see that in the subtraction there was a little something there. Something little left over. All I do is I group the parts that I know go together, move them down, and then delete what is left over. I'm only going to use these two because I still want to maintain a bit of that scene. So the next part of this, and I ended up not needing this mushroom, so that's good, or this, so we'll set that off to the side. So the next part of it is that I'm going to duplicate this, and I'm going to print these out, and then we will go to part 2 where you'll actually see me stamping it and then the final product. So stick around and I'll be right back. Okay, we are back. This is part 2 of the digital scene and clear stamp merging. We are going to go ahead and stamp what I printed out. Since I used the nearly no lines technique, you see that it's a light tan, and then I went for a dark outline for the Flutterby Fairy stamp. That way you could clearly see where I'm stamping. Now when I normally do this, this is much lighter. It is still there, but it is lighter. It's usually lighter than the scene itself. That way it gives me a rough area of where I'm going to be, but if I don't do it exactly right, then I can pull in the color from the nearly no lines from the scene around it that you can't even tell. I do have a finished one, so once we're finished stamping, I'll show you exactly how it looks when it's all done. You can't even tell that I did it this way. So to start with, you need your scene all printed out. I am using Crafter's Companion Nina Solar White cardstock. I printed it out twice, so we have so I have one all colored up. Spent the 2 hours coloring it up, and then I can show you this. I'm going to go ahead and tape this down. I usually do for my stamping. And the ink that I'm using is Memento Toffee Crunch ink, and it is due to the fact that this is nearly no lines, so we want that light tan color. It is darker than the one that I printed out, so it blends in very nicely. I usually use Jet Black from Memento, and considering I color with Copics, I always use Memento inks, as we've gone over many times on the Submod Girl blog and in the Submod Girl Facebook group. Memento works beautiful with Copics. Do not use stays-on inks with any of your alcohol markers. It will ruin your nibs. So here is I put the Flutterby Fairy on my acrylic block here. And one thing that I do every single time is that I take a white eraser, this is a trick that Leah Larange always says in the Some Book, Some Odd Girl Facebook group and on the website as well, is to take a white eraser and condition your stamp. I do this every time because it gives me such a good impression. So I'll do that with the fairy itself and the little butterfly. And of course, I wipe off. And what we want to do is, you'll see on the stamp, there is a kind of an offset on the stamp itself. And that is what we are matching up with this dark line. It gives, it centers the actual stamp in there and it works out really nicely. So that's what we're going for. So that you can see, I'm going to take my Toffee Crunch. I take the stamp pad to the stamp, and with my Toffee Crunch it has some issues. So another trick is that if you don't get that great of an impression, you can use a thick mouse pad underneath it. I couldn't find mine, but I do usually use that. So using the acrylic block, this is what's brilliant about clear stamps, is that now you can see exactly where I'm positioning it so I can get the angle right. I match up the offset on the clear stamp with the offset that was printed out, and I press down, making sure that I get it everywhere, straight up, and there you go. Now you can see it a little bit on the wing. She is not, it's not perfect. I did not center it perfect, and I never will with cut files. I'm always off on something, but she's there and you can see it. And any place that is overly done, again, pull in the color. On the second one that I did, I absolutely screwed up the placement of it. She was at the wrong angle. And from the scene that, from the scene that I put on the card, you won't even be able to tell. If you're not using the nearly lines technique, just take your thin micro pen that you could use with Copics and just draw on your own lines, and it works just as well. So now we're going to do this again with the butterfly. Make sure the butterfly is the right way. Again, lining up that offset with the printed out offset as best you can. Press down and lift straight up. And there you go. That's the easy part of this. It's a little nerve-wracking because you are off, but we spend so much time prepping it that the stamping part of it goes so easy. You don't have to worry about trying to mask it because technically you've already masked it. So you don't have to worry about that. All that's left is to color it. This image did take me 2 hours. Scenes usually do. And with nearly no lines, it will always take me a long time. So I had that up. But I did want to show you. This is the finished product. You can see, especially in the wing here, you can't even tell. That's where I was off the most. And down here, there's now a second little mushroom that wasn't there before because I added that because I was just off. And even though I had the picture up, I usually print out a picture of the scene as well and have it in your hand, or I have it up on my computer screen if I'm at my desk. And with this, it worked out, that the scene just kind of evolved and I could see exactly where it was. Nothing was totally missed. You have an edge behind that big mushroom there. But overall, I'm extremely pleased with how this is. I use most of the cut files there in this manner, and it makes it that I can combine all my digital scenes with any of the cut files that we have available. And as far as I know, we have a cut file for each and every clear stamp, which I think is brilliant. And I'm so glad that Christy decided to do that. So here we are. This concludes our little video tutorial, and I hope you try this out. And if you do, make sure you first link it up with the monthly link in.
on the Some Odd Girl blog. That's fantastic. It's so nice to see everyone's LinkedIn there, LinkedIn cards, and we can go and check it out and see how it is. And then also share it with us on the Facebook group so we can comment on it and say, check it out. It's awesome. So I want to say thank you, and this is Tabitha signing off.